So, Rabbi Friedman, good afternoon, and welcome back to our inspiring series of Torah for non-Jews. In earlier sessions, you guided us with your wisdom and inspiration to understanding better the principles of why, the laws of the Torah, the ideals of the Torah apply not only to Jews, but also to non-Jews, or what we would call perhaps Bnei Noach. I want to spend some time today, if possible, to kind of go through the history. Who are we as humans? Who are we? What is our general purpose? And I guess some examples in the Torah particularly about Bnei Noach, not about the Jews, not from the book of Exodus and on, but perhaps from the book of Genesis, to get a little understanding, a little inspiration, even from the lives of the Bnei Noach, the real, the people of the world. So what is the history?
History begins with Adam and Eve. I can't exactly say that they are Bnei Noach.
Well, they came before Noah, right? I get it, but they had the same general, I guess, the application of the same concept, right?
Yes. And God gave them 6 commandments. The first general instruction, before it came down to commandments, the general instruction was be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and conquer it. What does it mean to conquer the earth? To harness all the laws of nature so that they are all productive. So the earth has the potential of giving, producing wheat and all sorts of edibles, but you have to make the earth do it. So you got to plow it, you got to put in the seeds and so on. So that's called conquering. Also, when God created Adam and Eve and he put them in the Garden of Eden, he said, you're there to guard it and to work it. Work the garden. The whole world is God's garden, and we are the gardeners. So everything we do to make the world a better place, more livable, more inhabitable for human beings, and ultimately for God himself, that's the job of the human race. 6 commandments that followed are kind of general guidelines for how the world can become a really good, godly place.
Mm-hmm.
But every human being who keeps these 7 laws can rest assured that they are righteous and that they are doing the right thing. So no suspicion of guilt. If you know that you're doing these 7 laws, you know you're good. Stop suffering. Secondly, these commandments are kind of like categories. So the commandment to believe in God has many details, like pray. If you believe in God, you would talk to him, you would pray to him. So prayer is another commandment, but it's kind of included, when we're speaking in generalities, it's included in belief in God. So the average human being has almost 200 commandments, maybe more. One of these days, we got to sit down and put together a list.
Maybe we'll write another book.
I would love to, yes. Yeah. So all the commandments that are between man and man, every human being is obligated. So we know Jews have 613 commandments, but we were given 10 as a sampling. Non-Jews were given 7 as a sampling, but they really have over 200.
Okay, so
Like charity. Is charity a commandment for non-Jews? It's not one of the 7. So let's go through the list. 6 of those 7 were given to Adam and Eve. So for 1,000 years, until Noah's flood, those were the commandments that human beings had. Don't worship idols. Don't be blasphemous. Don't murder. Don't steal. Don't commit adultery. And have courts of law. Every society should teach and enforce the other commandments. For 1,000 years, people were governed by those laws, but they didn't keep them very well. That's why the flood came. After the flood, the world was repopulated by Noah and his family. So God repeated the 6 commandments and added a 7th. And that was to not be cruel to animals. Because after the flood, human beings were given permission to eat meat. But permission to eat meat does not mean that you can be cruel to the animal. So now we have 7 laws, and they're called Noachide laws because we are all descendants of Noach. So instead of going back to the 6 that were given to Adam and Eve, we attribute it all to Noach. Another reason is, before the flood, the world was not the way we know it. People lived to be 900 years old. Animals were 30 feet tall. Everything was disproportionate. After the flood, God said, from now on, 120 years maximum. No more giant animals. That's how the dinosaurs became extinct. It wasn't a meteor, crashing into Earth. So we call it the 7 Noachide laws because under Noach, all 7 were finally performed in the world as we know it. Whereas in the times of Adam and Eve, they were performed, but not in this world. It was some other kind of world. So every human being, it turns out, is committed to the same task. Make the world, Earth meaning Earth, make Earth more livable, more inviting for human beings and for its creator. That is a great unifier. We do it differently, Jews and non-Jews, but we're doing the same thing.
Now, when you say we're doing it differently, do you mind to elaborate?
Jews have different commandments.
You mean in addition to that? But essentially, the commandments that the non-Jew has, if I understand correctly, the Jew also has.
Yeah.
It's those plus so many others.
Right. Because the priests need to do more. And we are the priestly people, so we have more obligations or more opportunities to serve God. But we're all here to serve Him. And that means 2 things. Don't worship yourself. Don't serve your own needs. Serve Him. Number 2, don't try to get to heaven. Bring God down to earth.
Can you elaborate on that?
Well, there's too much emphasis put on heaven in religion, both Christianity and Islam.
But to me, to me, it sounds like it's just another form of worshiping yourself. It's where I want to go. It's what I want to achieve, what I think will be good for me. So it's essentially the same thing, just a little loftier. Am I
Right.
right?
Yeah. So it's understandable. We all want to be in heaven. The question is, what does God want? Does God want to be in heaven? Obviously not, because he leaves heaven to create earth. So God wants to be here. If you're devoted and committed to getting to heaven, you're going in the wrong direction. So the accomplishment is here on earth while you're alive, not someplace in heaven once you die. That itself makes a lot more sense.
Right. So I want to actually focus on that. You said don't worship yourself, which essentially means, be here for a higher cause, the purpose of bringing God down to the earth. So here's my question. I think sometimes, at least the way I see it out in the world, in the secular world, if they wanted to pick someone holy, someone observant, it almost has like a certain look of not sadness, but a look of, I guess, self deprivation or something, where somebody has to look like he's beaten a little bit or beating himself or something in order to look spiritual. So my question is, not worshiping yourself, being here for a purpose and fulfilling a purpose, does that give room for a person to enjoy life, to have fun, to enjoy the good things in the world? In other words, is pleasure allowed?
In some very strict religious beliefs, even humor is not allowed.
I couldn't deal with that.
Never mind pleasure. It's frivolous, it leads to sin. No, the whole point is to make this world godly. This world. Not deny the world, reject the world, and get off as quickly as possible. So you have to engage in the world, which means eat healthy, marry, have a healthy relationship. Make life on earth special. Don't avoid life on earth in favor of some aesthetic isolationist, you know, locking yourself into a monastery, and I don't know what they did there, or sitting on a mountaintop, without any possessions. That's not doing what God needs. That's seeking spiritual pleasure, which is not much better than physical pleasure.
Right. It's a form of self-worship, essentially.
Indulgence. You can be spiritually gluttonous.
Right. Okay, so bottom line is, it's okay to have pleasure. It's okay, like I'm saying, for a regular person that's not a saint. I mean, we don't have that concept. It's not, but someone who's not, over the top spiritual, just to have pleasure, having a good meal, having a good piece of steak, a good glass of beer. Just, is there anything? There's nothing inherently wrong, but is there anything inherently good with that? In other words, is that okay? Is that even recommended? Is that encouraged sometimes? So you have a good, pleasant life.
It's absolutely encouraged, because if you're not having a pleasant life, you're not very useful to God.
You're not going to function well.
But if the pursuit of pleasure takes you away from God, well, that's the abuse of it. So there is nothing we are forbidden to do. There's no pleasure that is not available. But it can be done in a godly way or in an ungodly way. So the pleasure of food, there's kosher food, there's non-kosher food, so that you have free choice. Sexual pleasure, there's kosher relationships, there's unkosher relationships. So no pleasure is denied. just select the better outlet or the better way or the more godly way of using that pleasure which he created. So he can't be against it. He's just particular in how you go about it.
Now, just to be sure, when you said there's kosher food and unkosher food, does this also apply as a general concept to non-Jews?
I wish it would.
No, I mean not to restrict. I mean the general idea that there's foods that you could, avail yourself to, and there's some foods that maybe you shouldn't. Obviously, if it's not healthy, you're killing yourself, you're hurting yourself.
No, but there is a commandment not to be cruel to animals. So if an animal was butchered while still alive, you're not allowed to eat any of that.
Oh, so that's the non-kosher for a non-Jew. Okay, so a lot of Chinese cuisine is totally out.
If you're not waiting for it to, if you're not killing it first, then yes, it's
Right.
horrendous. So some of the kosher laws that were given just to Jews, it wouldn't be a bad idea for non-Jews to participate. Like not to eat animals that are predatory. Don't eat anything that would eat you.
Yeah.
That's a good idea. Because predatory animals have a certain energy that is not really helpful for a moral life. You don't want to pick up that kind of energy.
So you're saying when you eat, the energy in the food gets transferred to you, becomes part of you. I have no desire to be a scorpion.
Yeah. So among birds, there are birds of prey. Should avoid them. Among animals, certainly, you don't want to eat.
So, for example, you would say, don't eat shark.
Well, fish is different. I mean, all fish live on fish.
So you're saying there's nothing to eat then? Okay.
But
So you say,
there are predators among the fish.
right.
They'll eat other things besides other fish.
Got it. So I just want to elaborate on some of the things you mentioned, some points you mentioned before, not in any particular order. You mentioned something very interesting, at least it intrigued me, that prior to the flood, prior to Noah's time, they were forbidden to eat meat. You mentioned something about the animals being 30 feet tall. I don't know if it has anything to do with that, but I assume not, because it's not inherent in eating animals or not. But then after the flood, suddenly God seems to like change his mind and almost like make up a rule and go, okay, now you can eat meat. What really changed? In other words, what changed in humanity? What changed in the world that now you could eat meat?
Okay, so if you want to find the scripture for it, when God puts Adam and Eve into the Garden of Eden, he says, of all the trees of the garden you may eat, which means vegetation was permissible, but not meat. And if God hadn't said, you may eat of all the trees, they would not have eaten. Because it's not theirs, and they can't just help themselves to it. So if God didn't say, all those fruits are for you to eat, they would never touch it. So it was not only a good advice to eat from the fruits, it was permission granted. But there was no permission granted for meat. After the flood, it was. And that's because when the world was so delicate before the flood, eating meat was inconsistent with that lifestyle. It's like they were not the earthy people we know human beings to be. Life was new, everything was an experiment. So they were delicate creatures, not cavemen, not barbarians. They were very sensitive, delicate people. And for them, a diet of vegetation was more than enough. After the flood, people became more earthy. Now that they're more earthy, they need more nutrients, they need more sustenance. Now they need what an animal offers, particularly red meat.
So if I may ask, you said that they were perhaps the world was very delicate. Does that mean like in the sense that they were more refined? So if that's the case, how did they? I mean, how can we explain the fact that they did things that later generations were just as equally capable of doing? And in fact, they were punished for it or destroyed because of it. In other words, if they were so refined, their bodies were so refined, I would imagine that that goes hand in hand with their spirituality being more refined, especially for almost 1,000 years. You had somebody who was created by God himself, and he can tell them, hey, I spoke to God, I heard his voice. How did they then? I mean, if they were so refined that they couldn't even eat meat.
Well, sometimes refinement can lead you astray. Like for example, God says, "Don't worship idols." They couldn't resist. Like, how could you not worship the sun? Look how much it does for you. So their delicate nature left them vulnerable to they they didn't have a backbone, which is a good thing to have. Later on, Moshe argues to protect the Jews from punishment. He says, no, 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 don't punish them. They're a stiff-necked people. Right? Is that a reason not to punish them?
Yes, to give them a double beating. That's a good reason to give them a double beating, right?
Break their stubbornness. Right?
Yeah.
No, the stiff-necked people means they're solid human beings. They're not the flighty people from before the flood that you can wipe them out. So sometimes morality demands some firmness that they didn't have. And so they couldn't resist the temptation of idol worship, which we can't even relate to. Why would you want to worship many gods? That's crazy.
Yeah, but they also committed adultery. They also stole from one another.
There,
I can
there,
relate to that.
yeah, there was no, there were no breaks. The no didn't exist.
Mhm.
Everything is God's creation. It's all wonderful. It's all good. It's all nice.
Okay, that makes sense. So going back to the meat thing, I'm just out of curiosity, and I know people can make a choice as how healthy they want to be or the foods they would, they want to eat. But would you say, at least as a matter of principle, that am I hearing that there's some issue with, veganism or, people being, extremely vegetarian? In other words, does God want us to eat meat? He allowed us to eat meat. He allowed us to eat fish. He allowed us to eat, eggs and milk. But does he want us to eat it essentially? Or maybe we say, hey, thank you so much, but we're going to stick to the vegetables or to the produce.
He does want us to eat it. The question is it a staple? Is it special occasion, holiday meals? But I think the principle still applies. If you're a physical worker, if you're an earthy kind of, then eating meat is appropriate for your metabolism, for your. But if you sit at a desk all day, meat is too heavy. Your life doesn't support it. So you don't have to eat meat other than on holidays. But if, most of history, people were heavy workers, physical, and they needed that energy that you get from the meat. But people who live a very inactive life, they need a less intense food. So if you're going to sit on a mountaintop and meditate, you need to eat once a week and some very delicate foods because that matches your lifestyle.
Mhm. Oh, that helps me. So, but you're saying if someone chooses to be, let's say, vegan
Yeah.
because of health reasons and so on, at what point is there like a red line? In other words, I know some people myself personally who it's almost like a religion for them. It's almost like a religion. And that's what's really, I mean, it just irks me. It's like, okay, eat whatever you want, but don't turn it into a. So where's the red line, if you can define?
First of all, don't say God is against meat because that's not true.
Well, he wouldn't allow it if he's against me.
Right? He's not against it. Secondly, it is not immoral. So don't make a religion out of it. And number three, don't get fanatical. For many people, not eating meat is a good idea. It's not a religion. Eating meat is not punishable by death. Don't turn it into a fanaticism. And don't go on a crusade to stop everybody from eating meat. That's an overreaction, over the top.
Okay. So speaking of fanaticism, and going back to a verse you quoted earlier in the conversation, you said that it says God placed man in the Garden of Eden in order to protect it and to work the land. So I know there are many people that, quote, care for the environment. They're environmentalists, they're green activists. And my question is, A, is that a service of God too? And B, can that take the place? Some of these people, perhaps when it comes to other areas of morality and adherence to these rules, they're totally void of that. So my question is, is that a contradiction? Is it almost like hypocrisy?
To do what?
To be like, an activist as far as the environment's concerned and, making the world a greener place and everything. And first of all, I'm asking if there's virtue to that, A. And B, is it hypocrisy if one is totally consumed with that, but yet on the other hand, perhaps when it comes to other areas of morality and ethics, perhaps they're lacking, to say the least. So, give us a perspective about it, on it.
I wouldn't be too critical of people who are not consistent. Every good thing stands on its own merit. We're not going to dismiss any goodness on the grounds that you don't have more goodness. That doesn't make sense. On the contrary, cultivate the goodness that is there and it'll bring more goodness. But if you knock it, well, what are you doing? A little bit of good, you're dismissing? So let's not be too critical of people who are hypocritical.
Okay. So then my question would be then, how about when you have, I mean, and there was some infamous cases over the years, you have some, Greenpeace activists who actually, done acts of terrorism and hurt people, let alone their property and caused chaos. What would, there you took a good cause, which, yeah, I understand is inherently good, but you've now hurt other human beings.
You took something righteous and you made it self righteous. Don't go self-righteous. But project is a good project. You clean up the rivers, clean up the lakes, clean up the parks, clean up the environment. Sure, why not? It's part of our obligation. But if you're becoming fanatical, if you're turning it into its own religion, then you're going to eventually destroy it. You will undo the good that you're doing. So you want to clean up the planet? Whose planet?
God's plan.
So don't create a new religion. The planet is God's planet, and cleaning it up is God's pleasure to see it clean. So serve God. Don't create another religion called environmentalism.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. But he's saying, but it is a virtuous thing.
It's a very virtuous thing because it kind of helps put the emphasis and focus back on earth.
I see.
If you really are impatient to get to heaven, how much are you going to try to clean up the world?
Correct. Right. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. So I mean, just I'm just trying to, I don't know how to word this, but following that, just as kind of like following what you just said, would you say that there's a virtue if somebody keeps a nice clean home with a white picket fence? In other words, is there a virtue in one being a good servant of God and having a nice community, a nice neighborhood, and making sure the lawn is well manicured and so on?
Yes.
Interesting.
Whoever goes to work and produces a product in a factory or whatever that helps people live easier, more convenient, more enjoyable, you're serving God. So whoever invented the electric toothbrush,
That's so okay. This is fascinating. It's very interesting. So talking about the electric toothbrush, we kind of segued back to the body, and I want to take a couple of minutes of your time. In last session we spoke more about the soul, where the soul goes and the purpose of the soul and so on. Can we focus a little bit on the body? And I'm not talking about worshiping the body. There's some people that take it to a crazy wrong degree of worshiping the body and so on. But is it okay, like I said, to aesthetically and besides, of course, the health, that for sure we've established that you need to do it in order to serve God. But from an aesthetic perspective, is it okay to quote, take care of one's body and be into it and exercising, all that stuff?
yes, with the precaution of not turning it into a religion, because it can very easily happen. The body actually does not belong to us. Just like my life does not belong to me, which is why I'm not allowed to kill myself. My body also doesn't belong to me, so I'm not allowed to harm it. I may not cause any damage to the body, not even disfigurement, because the body remains God's property. So that attitude, it's my body, I can do whatever I want, it's my life, none of your business. That's not. Life is never given away, it's only on loan. And the body is never given away. And that's why even after death, you treat the body with respect, because it's not your property. So anything we do to keep the body healthy, to keep the body pretty, that's all part of our tikkun olam, the perfecting of the world. So beauty is an important thing. God says, build me a temple out of gold, silver, copper, precious stones. Why not just make it out of mud, like Pharaoh did? Build me houses made out of mud bricks. Beauty is part of God's enjoyment. So, absolutely. But no worshiping of the body. In fact,
So
I
if I,
have a feeling that worshiping the body is actually unhealthy for the body.
how so?
You overdo it. People who are so particular about what they eat that they're starving, they're malnourished. And there are
I think
people who
Jackie
say
Mason had a joke about that once, no?
health
They
is
don't look healthy.
it's a
Correct.
krachen.
Yeah, it's a krach, it's a ribben. Right, I hear. So, following that, just a follow-up to that. So is a non-Jew allowed to have tattoos? According to what you're saying, according to the principles of the Torah? I know a Jew is forbidden to do that, but is a non-Jew allowed to have a tattoo of his favorite team or?
I would guess not. I would have to check, but I would guess not. Certainly, according to Rambam considers tattoos part of idol worship.
Oh, not you mean that they're forbidden and not allowed to have. And even nowadays, you would extend it that say that the origins of it is idol worship. So even today, that people have no remote connection to that. That's not why they're doing it. It's just a fashion statement or something.
It's definitely not a fashion statement because you can't take it off.
So what is it then? You're saying it means something deeper to the person who's putting on the tattoo.
I don't know if it means deeper, but once you got it, you got it. There's
Right,
no
correct.
going back. So it's not like you can change the fashion with every season. That's it. That's it for life. You got it. So it's not a fashion thing. It's a fad. All of a sudden, everybody is into it, which is
Right.
like a virus. But yeah, if it has any association with idolatry, should not be done.
Okay, and you're saying if it has any association, even if it was just the origin of it, even though now it has no connection to actual idolatry. Very interesting. So you said for that, in that you would suggest that even a non-Jew is not allowed to have a tattoo. I want another follow-up question. You mentioned something about the body being sacred and being the property of God, and that's why even after one's death, the body has to be treated with respect and dignity. So, following that, is it okay for a non-Jewish body to be cremated, or does it have to get buried? Like we know in Judaism, it's very, very, imperative and crucial that the Jew gets buried properly.
Even if it's not a commandment, it's certainly the right thing to do. From dust you are, and to dust you return, not to ashes. The body comes from the earth, and it should go back to the earth. Cremation is a crude, callous, even though you can do it very nicely, with music and. Why would you destroy the body? Why? Because you have no room for it? It's cluttering up your backyard? What are you doing? Why? Because it's cheaper than a funeral? These are not good reasons. The body served you very well, very loyally for whatever number of years, and now you're just going to incinerate it like garbage? That can't be right for anybody. And the commandment or the statement, from dust you are and to dust you return, was not said to the Jewish people, it was said to all human beings.
No, that was said to Adam.
Mhm.
Uh-huh. So you're suggesting is that a righteous non-Jew or somebody who wants to follow the rules would leave instructions to be buried, have a proper burial. Understood. A proper burial. That's very interesting. So wow. So I mean, we covered a lot today, and I did, that was the thing. The main focus I wanted to focus on, what is our role in the world, and the body, and so on. I know we're out of time. I'm looking forward already to the next class, and perhaps we'll start going through some of the laws. Maybe we'll talk about it beforehand. But do you want to have anything else that you want to add or inspire us with regarding the body, our lives? I don't know, pleasure, things that we covered in the class.
Not really on topic, but in terms of importance, it is really, really crucial today that the public schools add a little morality to their curriculum. And I know that's going to bring out every kind of objection and every kind of separation of church and state and all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, and who defines morality? And
so the Rebbe suggested very urgently that the day begin with a moment of silence. We know how powerful a moment of silence is. I mean, we commemorate in Israel, we commemorate the Holocaust victims with a moment of silence. Everything stops. Everybody pulls their cars over to the side of the road and steps out of the car. And for a moment, everything is quiet. And it's powerful. It forces your mind to go to a better place. So if every school would start their day with a moment of silence, we would suddenly have a much more moral society. Children should be encouraged from the youngest grades to start their day with a thought. What am I doing here? What is the purpose of school? What is the purpose of life? How do they know what to think? They should ask their parents. That way, the parents become more thoughtful. The few schools that are already doing this have reported amazing improvement in school spirit, in academic achievements, in attendance went up.
attendance?
Now, when a kid is miserable at school, he'll use any excuse not to show up. Stomach ache, headache.
Wow. I can tell you from my own personal experience here in Miami-Dade County, and this is, because I'm in Florida. So this is the first year, the first school year, which this applies to, because they passed the law past summer to implement a moment of silence. And I went to the school board here in Miami-Dade County and said, not just it should be on the books, but someone should see to it that it actually, is implemented. And thank God they passed it and gave advisory to the principals that they have to encourage and what to encourage all the teachers and to report back. And then in the district that I live in, I went to the president of the district and I said, maybe we make a little contest for the students, an essay contest. And they won some prizes. And it was amazing. We got about I think if I remember correctly, roughly about 100 entries from all grades, starting from first grade all the way down up to high school. And more with the younger kids. It was amazing, the insight that they wrote. What does a moment of silence mean to me? So I concur with everything you said, that it really does. And this is a sampling from all the students, the ones who actually sat down to write the essays. So
anybody who has any influence, who can make a phone call to a principal, to a teacher, to the board of education, it would be really, really life-saving. Because imagine all these guys who came to school and shot up wherever it was, If we had implemented this moment of silence when the Rebbe urged it in the 80s, all these shooters would have grown up with it, and it may have made the outcome could have been very different.
100%. I know we're against the clock here. So thank you so much, Rabbi Friedman. I'm looking forward to the next class. And anybody is listening, if you have any questions, please, or comments or suggestions for future discussion, please write to ask me at torahfornonjews.com. Thank you so much. Have a